off today. We're talking about everybody's favorite topic in the first week of January, which is how to get more done. For our readers here at Attitude, the question of how to increase productivity in the face of what everybody experiences as an overwhelming set of to-dos is just a daily struggle. If you're here because you're wondering how to set priorities, how to get started, how to get organized, this is the webinar for you. Our speaker today is certified productivity coach and professional organizer, Susan Lasky, and she'll be giving us the tools and strategies we need to put those New Year's intentions into practice. Some of her topics are how to turn on your get started switch, what kind of practical strategies you need to minimize the overwhelm sensation that we all experience, what the critical difference is between a task and a project, and why you should think about actions rather than a to-do list. And then finally, the big one, how to eliminate time wasters like perfectionism, negative thinking, and screen time. Let me tell you a bit more about Susan before she gets started. She has been helping families and students get things done using strategies that work with the way people think since 1991. She was a co-founder of the CHAD chapter in New York City, and she is a senior certified ADHD coach, a level 2 specialist in chronic disorganization, and a Golden Circle member of the National Association of Professional Organizers. She frequently speaks and writes on topics related to ADHD, productivity, organization, time management, work-life balance, and she also runs an online action accountability group, so called overwhelm.com. If you want to reach Susan, you can check her website out, susanlasky.com. So Susan, thanks so much for joining us at Attitude today. The timing is perfect. And despite all of our technical issues, we're grateful that you're here and that we'll get started. A few notes for the listeners. Please post your questions in the box on your screen at any time. Susan will present her slides and then she'll take as many questions as time permits. Her slide presentation is available for download now in the handout section on the right of your control panel. You'll find a replay of this webinar, including the presentation slides, for download on the Attitude website later this afternoon if you want to share it with someone or take notes again. So with that, let me turn it over to you, Susan, and thanks again for being here.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm happy to be here. I'm sorry we had some trouble getting started because I have so much information to give you. So let's get going with that. What I do need is for you to, there we go. Okay, go up one. All right. First of all, one of the most challenging concerns for people with ADHD, and perhaps the most frustrating, I think, is the frequent inability to self-motivate or get started. As Dr. Barkley put it so well, ADHD is not about knowing what to do, but about doing what one knows. So it's important to realize our brains won't always cooperate. Motivation is not the same as activation. Activation is an executive function, and even though we could want to do something, it doesn't mean we're actually wanting something won't make it happen. Working hard is not the same as working smart. People with ADHD work very hard, sometimes a lot harder than their peers because things take longer. But there are ways of working smarter, more efficiently, and we'll cover some of those. The shoulds will only get you frustrated and possibly depressed, and so you'll be less productive. So even though we're tempted to say, I should be able to do that, or I should have done that, try to wipe it out of your vocabulary because it doesn't really do you any good at all. Your neuroatypical brain will follow its own set of rules. So go with the flow, and we will talk more about that. It's important to know yourself, know your brain. And step number one is starting with self-awareness. Who you are and who you aren't. What you're likely to do and what you are not likely to do, how you work versus how you wish you worked. If you aren't realistic here, you run the risk of setting yourself up for failure. But step number 2, practice self-acceptance. You may not like everything about yourself, but research shows that those who accept themselves are happier and more productive. That doesn't mean that you can't work towards changing things for the better. So step number 3 is believe in possibility and that you always have a choice. If you feel you're totally stuck and you have no choice in the matter, then you're in a victim mode and it does you no good whatsoever. These steps are from my 7-step power plan to success with ADHD, and there is a free guidebook available for download on my website, SusanLasky.com. Moving on from here, beware the dreaded overwhelm. If I could think of one word that is the most debilitating to people with ADHD, it's overwhelm. What happens is that when we feel overwhelmed, the rational part of our brains, the frontal lobes where executive functions lie, they're usurped by our caveman or reptilian protective brain, the amygdala. It perceives stress and overwhelm as a threat. And so it sends us into what was very helpful for our caveman ancestors, the fight, flight, or freeze mode. The problem is nowadays, most of our stresses are mental, not physical. And when we take tackling the stack of to-dos, when we feel stressed and overwhelmed, we're more likely to flee into the other room and watch TV than to attack it. So if we could prevent overwhelm at the source, we're going to be a lot more productive. So in keeping with that, one of the things to consider here is to recognize what are your overwhelm triggers. They may vary on the situation, but too much to do, not enough time, conflicting priorities, lack of interest, when something is too difficult, when you're confused about how to do it, unclear expectations, when something is boring, or when you physically or mentally, you're lacking energy, or you're hungry, thirsty, or you didn't sleep enough. All of these things are triggers for overwhelm. So we talked about, I'm having trouble here with the computer. We talked about self-awareness, including your overwhelm triggers. We talked about self-acceptance of both your strengths and challenges and the belief that you could do things differently. So once you believe you could do things differently, the question is, okay, what should I do? Your next step to success is to set clear goals and prioritize. You can't catch 2 rabbits at the same time. The 2 magic words for productivity: clarity. What exactly am I going to do? How and when am I going to do it? And priority, the sequence, which has to take into consideration 2 different concepts. One is your life-based categories. You can't focus just on one thing. We have a full life, and it has to include your home, which your household, meals, financial, shopping, work, responsibilities, communication, relationships, family, romantic, friends, and community, which it might be religious, neighborhood, school, self-care, things like exercise and sleep, but also me time, which are self-growth, hobbies, things you enjoy. All of those are elements of a holistic time-balanced life, and we want to include them. Now, as far as time-based priorities, we could look at things and see it in different ways. And one of the easiest is to consider it now, which is things you want to do or need to do today or tomorrow, soon, sometime this week or next, later, within 1 to 3 months, and whenever, which are things you want to keep on the radar, but they're not a current priority. How do you make it happen? It's important to divide planning time from action time or doing time. Doing time sounds too much like actually doing time in prison, so let's call it action time. The time to figure out what you're going to do or how to do it is not when you're ready to work. Just think about it. You get up, you're ready, you're feeling alert, you're feeling energized, and then you sit there and try to figure out what you should work on. No, use that energy to direct it into a project. So set aside time for weekly planning where you see a broader perspective and plan out this week and most of next week, subject to change, but at least you have a good idea. And then there's daily planning and review where you look at every day, either in the evening or the morning, to see what is left over from the day before, what has come up that I haven't considered, and what will my day look like. A minute spent planning can save actually 20 to 40 minutes of effort. It avoids overwhelm and makes activation easier because you have that clarity that I just spoke about. Review by both your life-based categories and your time-based categories, priorities. Start with the end in mind and work backwards. If you have a deadline for something, you figure out what goes into meeting that deadline, and then you know when you really have to start making the effort to get it done. Considerations include available time. People often don't realize that they don't have as much available time as they think they do. Consider how long you take to do things, not how long you wish you took to do things. Look at your energy fluctuation, times of day when you're more efficient, deadlines, things that are important and meaningful. And very much consider, is it a task or a project? And I'll talk more about that in a minute. But think proactively, not reactively. And the only way to really think proactively is when you're planning. So understand the scope of what you have to do. And the biggest mistake I think people make is they think of doing something, but it's a project. You can't do a project, you could only do a task. So if it is a project, and it could be a project, could be even cleaning a room. It involves so many different individual tasks that if you're not great at sequencing or you forget things, it could get very confusing, and then it leads to overwhelm and therefore avoidance. So if it's a project, create a project sheet where you list the steps, tasks that you could focus on and accomplish. If you're working with a child and you want them to do certain things, list the steps and post them. Don't expect anyone to remember them, especially if the sequence is more than 2 items. The more clarity you have, the easier. So if you're having trouble doing a project, you might want to ask some deeper questions that'll get to the root of it, like, why am I doing this? What do I want to achieve? How do I feel about doing it? How much effort is needed? Being realistic, but also keeping a lid on perfectionism. Who is driving the project? Is it something you're totally disinterested in, but you have to do for someone else, or something you're self-motivated? What are their expectations or my expectations? What resources am I going to need, whether it's information, whether it's things from other people? Resources include money, items, but if you don't have all that figured out, you're going to have a delay in being able to complete the project. And most of all, do I understand how to do it? Do I know exactly what it is I want to do? So now that you're clear on what you want, step number 5 is to strategize for success. And people with ADHD particularly need 2 types of strategies. One is how to best accomplish the actual task, which everyone needs. But the second one is how to get yourself going when you just don't feel like it. Basically, how do you turn on your activation switch? Strategies to get things done. Less is often more, and it's helpful to keep that in mind. Limit your daily priorities. Schedule realistically. Keep a short action list, not a to-do list, which could be 50 pages. Leave white space in your daily calendar. If you schedule every minute, you're going to really run into a problem because there are things that are going to take longer than expected. New subjects are going to pop up that have to be dealt with. Where are you going to fit them in? So leave some space, and if nothing happens, you could just use it to enjoy yourself. Same thing on a weekly basis. Include some downtime. Have periods which you've set aside for not doing any work, so you could recharge. When you recharge, you're more productive. Beware decision-making fatigue. Consider it a decision-making muscle that we have. You could build up the muscle, and with practice and with understanding different techniques for decision-making, it is possible to get a lot better at it. So you're building the muscle, but at the same time, if you work it out too much, the muscle gets tired. So avoid making too many decisions in a day. It may be a good idea to make the decision earlier in the day so you could focus more on it and keep down the amount of things that you feel you have to do or you have to think about. The clearer you are, the better. Decision making always involves a degree of uncertainty and confusion, so try to minimize it within a day. Think good enough, then stop. Perfectionism is the enemy of productivity. We get so caught up in the finishing it or doing the little bits that we're using 80% of our time for 20% of the results. Put on imaginary blinders. There's always so much going on, always so much to do, so much you didn't do, that if you start thinking about all of it, you're not going to be very efficient with what you're working on at the moment. So put on blinders, limit your focus to what you are doing, and temporarily ignore the rest. The graphic that you see on the side, it's hard to see, I'm sure, but it's a time block weekly schedule, and that's one way of thinking about fitting in your different categories. By dividing your day into blocks, in this case it's 2 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, 1 in the evening. In between the blocks, you have things like your morning routine, your mid-morning break, lunch break, afternoon break, early evening routine. It gives you an opportunity to divide things up, and you could decide what category you're going to fit into what slot. Lighten your workload whenever possible. Is it possible for you to eliminate, delegate, modify, or delay? Too often we think we have to be one to women or one to men, but at what cost? If we're able to let something go, if we're able to give it to someone else, often someone who could do it a lot more efficiently and better than we can, there's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes it's helpful to look at a project and say, do I really have to do all of this? Maybe I can modify it and do it a little differently. Or I'm really busy this week, can I delay it? Time wasters. Bust the time wasters. Here are examples of just a few of them. Interruptions. You're going to have interruptions, expect them, but minimize them. Use different techniques. Put a sign on your door or a message on your phone saying when you'll be free. It can't be too far in the future because if people need to reach you, they do, but at least it gives you some time that you could work. The graphic here says currently in concentration mode. So unless it's really important, contact me after, and there's a clock and you could put the time on it. Often people interrupt and say, can I talk to you? And you don't have to talk to them unless they're your boss or something really pressing. You can say, and even to a boss, you could say, I could give you 2 minutes now, or can we talk at 4 o'clock? You're giving people the option of having a rushed conversation or having a good conversation. And you're working within your time parameters. Sometimes it's helpful to work in a different space where maybe people can't contact you as easily. Also, it takes you out of the environment and makes it easier to work at times. Screen addiction. We're all living in an age where we're on the computer, on the phone, on the laptop, the notebook, the TV. Do whatever you can to minimize the screen addictions. You'll have a lot more time to do other things, whether it's your work or pleasure. Turn off pop-up notifications. Very rarely do you need to know that someone sent you an email or contacted you on Facebook. But set times when you check your email. Instead of feeling you have to check it every day, 10 times a day, maybe you want to check it 3 times a day or 4 times a day. It frees you up from being stuck to the screen. Use a timer or an app that limits your social media or TV time. These are available where, let's say you want to work on a project. You could set it so that you can't contact certain websites until a certain time. Do a reality check. Create a screen time log and keep it for a few days. Note down when you're looking at what you're looking at, and you may be shocked by how much time you're wasting. Another time waster is additional workloads, whether it's for work or home. It's important to learn to say no so you can say yes to what really matters. And tied in with that is create a not to-do list. Practice different ways of saying no so that you could do it graciously, because our tendency is to say yes when we're asked to do something. And if you do say yes, or you want to say yes, don't say it if you can't say when, because that means that it won't be done and you're going to be hit with incompletion or major deadline trauma. Some strategies to get things done. Have strategic plans. Use different techniques. One of the ones that I really like is ITTT, which stands for if this, then that. If it's 8:30, I have to leave to get to my 9 o'clock gym class. It avoids unproductive internal discussions. Should I go or shouldn't I go? I don't feel like it. Well, if you've already decided that this is your schedule and this is what you're doing, it's not open for debate. So if it's this, then it's that. If I decided I need to go to bed earlier, then if it's 10 o'clock, I turn off my screens. If it's 11 o'clock, I shut the light. Whatever you want to accomplish, if you follow it in an if-then, it makes it easier because it saves us from the I want to mode, which is our natural default, or I don't want to, or I'd rather do this. Link behaviors. People with ADD often think in relationships rather than things being independent. And if you associate something you already do with something you'd like to do, you're more likely to be able to develop a habit of doing it. So an example would be, you decide you want to do 5 minutes of stretching every day. You already get dressed in the morning. So if you link that before I get dressed, I do 5 minutes of stretching, then it's easier to make it happen. Go with your flow. When you are in the flow, which is like your productivity zone, which happens a few times a day, that's when you should be working on tasks that require attention, require focus. That's a great time to really use the superpowers that often come with ADHD, the hyperfocus, the ability to see things when you take the time to really focus on them. But at the same time, sometimes we're not in the flow. And recognize when you are in the fog. That's when, like, you're just out of it. The thing to do then is, instead of sitting and forcing yourself to do something that isn't happening, you could shift the focus to tasks that are less demanding. That's a good time to organize your drawer or make a list of something. That doesn't require the same thinking power. Strategies to get things done: use the right tools. And you could develop your own tools, but think in terms of having them. First of all, write it down. Don't depend on your memory for anything. That's a waste of time. Use calendars, reminders, whatever works for you. Some people prefer paper planners, or they prefer computer calendars because they could access it from any device. It doesn't matter what you use as long as you use it. So make a commitment to writing it down, and not writing down little pieces of paper all over the place that tend to get lost. If you want to take notes, have a notebook that you could refer to and then use that information somewhere else. It could be a physical notebook, it could be on the computer, but try to avoid little pieces of paper everywhere. That's different than having reminders everywhere. That works for some people. The task appointment is a concept. It's making an appointment with yourself to do a certain thing at a certain time. It's the same as you would make an appointment with someone else. If you have to reschedule, you can reschedule, but the point is, it's there. The task appointment is incredibly helpful for doing things that we say, yes, we're going to do, but because we haven't said when, we may not wind up doing them. An example that works would be to put on your calendar twice a month to spend some time on your financial stuff, where you go through your statements, you pay your bills, you check what's going on. If you don't have a time set aside to do it, there's a good chance that either it won't happen or it'll happen past the deadline. An example would be when you set aside things that you want to review or to read. They'll sit in piles forever, but if you put on your calendar a task appointment to spend an hour reading the things in my review folder, well, then there's a better chance that you're going to get to it. And the nice thing about it is that you don't forget things. So, for instance, even something like going to the library, putting it on the calendar so you don't wind up having overdue books. The daily focus, using a grounding form. By grounding, I mean it brings you back focused on what you need to do. We talked earlier about minimizing your priorities and having an action list. So an example is to have a daily focus list where you have 3 major priorities listed and maybe 3 secondary ones if you finish the first 3. By looking at that, you focus in on what it is that you need to accomplish. One of the things you want to include on that sheet is a parking lot. A parking lot is a space where you could capture all of the many thoughts that will constantly pop up in your head. The benefit of putting them in the parking lot is they don't then distract you, because how do you remember them? You remember them by keeping them ever present in your memory, which means that that's where you focus, not on the work you need to do. Or you forget them. So using a parking lot allows you to continue doing what you're doing, but take a second to write down, oh yeah, I need to pick up the dry cleaning. Or, oh, I need to return her phone call. Instead of trying to remember and forget, or trying to remember and losing ground with other things you're trying to do. Check-off lists are very effective because you could see what you've done and it makes you feel good. What did I do list? That's a little different. That's in retrospect. Often we may look back and say, I didn't accomplish anything today, or I didn't do things. But if we really start thinking about it, there are a lot of things we've done that may not have been on our action list, may not have been on our checklist, and yet we did them. And sometimes just getting up, dressed, and taking a shower is a Herculean effort, and we should give ourselves credit for it. And you could do that with a what did I do list. Set alarms. Don't depend on being aware of the passage of time because it isn't going to happen. Some people have periodic alarms or pop-ups, and in this case, a pop-up may be helpful, that say, am I on task? Am I doing the most important thing that I could be doing? Because let's face it, we drift. We drift to whatever captures our attention at the moment. Set alarms for transition time. It is very hard to switch from one thing to another. First of all, once we finally get going on something, it's easy to get caught up in hyperfocus or just, I want to get it done. That could be detrimental if there's something else that is important for us to do. So we have to break away from what we're doing, and at the same time, we have to activate to do something else. So transitions could be really tough. Set alarms, not just like, oh, at 9 o'clock I have to do this, but at 8:45 I have to get ready to do this at 9 o'clock. Use templates to avoid extra work. If there's anything you do on a regular basis, whether it's a shopping list or meal planning or something that you do at work, a form, set it up as a template. Stop reinventing the wheel. Create a productive environment. A productive environment is having things set up in such a way that you could be more efficient with the work you do. It could be your desk, it could be your kitchen, it could be your crafts room. You want to use the real estate, the prime real estate, which is the spaces that are closer to you, for the things that you access more frequently. You don't want to have too many distractions facing you because then it becomes hard to focus in. Use different containers or tools that will complement the way you work. In keeping with that also, lighting. People tend to ignore that a lot. Use natural daylight and consider task lighting. Fluorescents are horrendous. And a lot of people have a degree of SAD, seasonal affective disorder, or just work better when it's sunny and bright. And you could mimic this by having natural daylight lights shining on your workplace. I know for me, it actually helps energize me to do things. Use appropriate, easily accessible folders, whether they're plastic project files or paper file folders or containers or whatever it is that works best for you, but label them, label everything. Don't count on your memory to know, oh, I know what's in there, because after 2 weeks, you're probably going to forget. Or you have to spend time thinking about it. Same thing with handwritten labels. They may work, but they don't look as nice, and it takes longer to deal with it. And the nicer it looks, the more you want it to go there. Bullet point communications. Too often people just have a hard time writing even an email because they get into a narrative. Don't get into a narrative, just bullet point what are the primary things that you're talking about, what do you want to say about them, and what action, what end result do you want. For the subject line on an email, make sure the subject pertains to what it is that's in it. If you're doing a back and forth and the topic changes, change the subject line. When you're talking to people in general, bullet point what you want to say to them, especially if it's an important conversation. Prepare in advance rather than rambling. Strategies to get going. Attitude and positive self-talk. Try to turn your need tos, have tos, must tos into want tos. It is so much easier to get started on something you want to do than on something you have to do. Reframe negative or critical thinking. What does that mean? Reframing means to think about something in a different way than you have been. So I give an example here in yellow. Disorganized. A lot of people are disorganized, and it's considered a negative trait, and in some ways it is, but in other ways you could think of it as these people are flexible. They're able to function when things are out of alignment or chaotic. They're comfortable with change, unconventional. It's putting a positive spin on it that isn't just out of nowhere. It has some foundation in truth. It's like when my son, who is then 9 years old, called a very hyperactive 2-year-old that the adults were complaining about, he said, she's not hyperactive, she's just actively exploring her world. Oh my gosh, think of the difference of growing up feeling you're an explorer versus you're a pain. Think of how the parents feel that their child is not just annoying or running around, but is discovering, is looking at things in a different way. So try to reframe the negative. At the same time, acknowledge but ignore the ants. Ants are automatic negative thoughts. They happen all the time. The problem is when the thoughts stop us from the action or hurt us emotionally. If we just accept that they're going to be there and we acknowledge it as part of the process, then they don't have the power that they would have otherwise. And that also applies to rumination, where there's something that we're thinking about and we can't get it out of our head and it goes around and around. If we can't make a decision about it, write down that you have to deal with it and then follow a decision-making process. But to keep ruminating detracts us from the productivity that we so desperately want. Consciously remember the positive aspects of what you're doing or you're working towards. It's easy to get caught up in things and forget why and what would be good about what you're doing. Post reminders, photos, inspirational quotes, whatever could help remind you why you want to do what it is you're doing. Focus on the now. For people with ADHD, it's either now or not now. If it's not now, you're not necessarily in a good place. Usually when it comes to things, you're just not thinking about them at all. But also sometimes it means going to the past, and if you're in the past, you could be depressed thinking about things, and if you're thinking about the future, you could be anxious. So you could minimize anxiety and increase mindfulness, which is being truly present, by focusing on what it is you're doing in the present, in the now. Be a detective. William Dodson, he just recently gave a webinar, and he talked about the different nervous system of people with ADHD, where things like rewards, consequences, and importance don't motivate us the same way that they may someone with a neurotypical brain. So if rewards and consequences aren't as effective, find what interests and challenges you. Importance doesn't motivate as well as novelty. What could be interesting? What could be unusual about what it is you want to accomplish or you have to accomplish? Use creativity to approach even boring tasks. It's the kind of thing where a kid doesn't want to get dressed in the morning and you give them a challenge. I bet you can't do that in 5 minutes, and suddenly they're dressed and it's smiling because you made a contest out of it. Do the same thing with yourself as an adult. Make a contest, make it fun, and you really win in so many ways. Think about strategies to get going, strategies to trick your brain. One thing is to change your environment. New studies are showing that just stepping outside helps to reset your brain. So when you're feeling kind of in the fog, or you've been working at something and you've had it, just step outside, even for a short period of time. And it makes a difference in the clarity level. If you go for a longer period of time, you could go, not everyone will agree with this because I know we have some city dwellers who love it on the phone, but being in nature, the Japanese have a concept called forest bathing, because they feel that when you're surrounded by nature, you actually are bathing in the energy, new energy, rejuvenating energy, and that may work for you. So consider spending outdoor time that way. Get active. Get up and do some movement, jumping jacks, anything to reset. It's found there are tons of books on this now, that physical activity not just helps your body, but it helps your cognitive functioning. So try to work it in. If you have a lunch break, take a walk and go somewhere, walk upstairs, whatever it is that you can do. It doesn't have to be major, but even a little bit resets that fog and helps you get into the flow. Visualize successful completion. That's where those reminders often come in. But instead, we tend to focus on fear of failure. Here we want to look at what we could do that will make us succeed. Experiment with positive distractions, which could be white noise, scents, music, brain-based music. There's music that helps you to relax, focus, or be activated. I know that it's a lot easier to clean if you have lively dance music on than it is if you don't. Set a timer, even for 15 minutes. You may not finish, but you'll have made progress, so you succeeded at what you were doing. And success breeds success. Use a body double, which is someone who's there. They may not be working with you, but they're there, and that helps keep you focused. It's why kids do their homework in the kitchen, because the parent is working in the kitchen, and it just makes it easier to stay focused on their work. Or have an accountability partner, someone you talk to every day, every week, where you discuss what are your goals, how am I going to do there, and how did I do in getting there. That's about what coaching is about, where we discuss different issues and there's a degree of accountability, and that helps create change because you want to say, I did it. Deadlines help. No longer are there completing, a lot of times people will say to me, well, how come I do everything last minute? There are good reasons why. they're neurobiological. There are no longer competing priorities, so you're able to focus more on what you need to get done. And you also have the benefit of the adrenaline rush, which is like a natural stimulant. So you don't want to have to do everything last minute, but if you could impose some kind of deadlines, interim deadlines, it could be very helpful. Consider a task app that gives immediate rewards. Long-term doesn't work, but it's fun to get a badge. There are some that help, a tree starts growing as you do things, or you get to the next level or points. Anything that gives you a reward, an immediate reward, makes it easier to do it. Practice Morita psychology. Morita psychology is Japanese, the psychology of action. And it's based on the premise that you could take limited action despite your feelings. So get started. Don't let your emotions get in the way of doing things, or your thoughts. I'm going to fail, or I don't want to. If you need to write something and you're finding it incredibly difficult, just open the book to a clean page and put a pen in your hand and say you're going to write a sentence, or open the computer to a file and start using the keyboard for even one sentence. What happens is once you get started on something, the Zeigarnik effect takes place, which states that it's harder to get unfinished tasks out of our brain. So once you start it, it becomes an unfinished task, and it's an incentive to finish it. We're running out of time, and I really would like to have at least a little bit for question and answers. So
Susan, thank you. Would you like me to turn to some of the questions?
Sure, I'm going to turn to the next slide, and I can't seem to do that. Oh, there we are. Okay. Just the last comment I want to leave you with is stop beating yourself up for what you're not. Find strategies to maximize your strengths and successfully compensate for your challenges, so you can live a life you truly love. And again, thanks everyone for attending and for putting up with the technical difficulties.
Thank you, Susan.
I have some questions.
Great. So a lot of the questions that we have are from people who understand your recommendations but are looking for help putting them into effect. So what they would like is, for example, let me give you one question that has numerous variations here. Someone with multiple to-do lists, some for work, some for home, and they find those to-do lists overwhelming. How would you suggest they implement a different system to manage those to-do lists?
The two words are clarity and priority. So you're going to have humongous to-do lists. We all do. If we look at a humongous to-do list, it becomes more difficult to do it. So even if it's arbitrary, there are certain things that you want to pull out and say, okay, those are going to become my now priorities or my soon priorities. And you go through different pillars of your life, which could be your personal, your work, your financial, whatever it is, or even within the work, you may have different pillars. You may have administrative, marketing, sales. So you need to be clear on what it is that the tasks are. Do you have to do them, or could someone else do them? Are they priorities in terms of getting them done, or could they be delayed? And while we don't want to delay everything, the fact is the less we have to do, less is more, the more likely we are to start getting things done. If your priorities from different segments of your life, so you're not ignoring things, but make it easier to do and more efficient. Consider getting other people involved also with certain challenges, so you're not doing it alone. That brings up the concept of the body double, but it could also be a body partner to get things done. there is no easy answer, and sometimes it takes really going through everything and saying, if I don't do this, what will the end result be?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes looking at it in negative gives you an answer as to what your priority is.
Okay. I think that's helpful. Great. Another question here comes from someone who runs a very large and complex household, and sometimes tasks just pop up and need to be dealt with immediately. She wants to know what your tips are for planning her day around chaos and how to get back on track when you can come up with a schedule, but things intervene that have to be handled.
Well, that's where I talked about having white space in your daily calendar so that you can shift things around or add in things that are critical. The other thing is to also, when you create your daily schedule, you could consider what are the things that if you didn't do them today wouldn't be as damaging. You'd like to do them today, but maybe you can't pay the bills today because you have to go pick up a sick child from school. I could shift that to the white space I have tomorrow. So it's, again, looking at the priorities, but also trying to leave some space for the interruptions.
Okay. People really are enthusiastic about your My Daily Focus chart, and they wonder whether it's possible to get a template for that.
Absolutely. You could send me an email and just say Daily Focus, and I'll send you the link for that. It's Susan,
or Susan, we could put it online with your slide presentation if you have one available, send it to us.
And then access it online.
Okay, yeah, and then people can download it when they download the slides for the presentation. Question about the getting things done strategy from is it David Allen? Yes, that's his name, right? Do you have any sense of how helpful that is for people with ADHD or the Franklin Covey system? Do you have a point of view on some of the existing organizational systems?
For some people, it works really well. For a number of people, it's too complicated.
Right, that's what people are saying. Is there a simpler way to do that? It's quite complex.
It is, well, life is very complex, and so is the people who said, I have too much to do, then there's time to do it.
Right.
Yeah, it is complex. But that's why I have things like the daily focus form. I suggest making just lists of the different categories of things and then prioritizing them as best you can. Having it all in a mechanical system, whether it's a physical system or an electronic system, is very helpful for the people who could follow through with that, but a lot of people can't. And sometimes just having things paper, handwritten, is more helpful than a more complex, better system. Again, less may be more. Right,
okay. You mentioned a task app, something about a tree, growing a tree. Interest in that idea. Can you amplify or give some further details on that?
It's one of the apps I've seen that as you do things, the tree blossoms in front of you. It's just there are other apps that have other graphics that as you accomplish the things on your list, you see the immediate rewards for it.
So any suggestions for specific apps for managing tasks? Someone here says this app is, a couple of people have posted that this app is called Forest.
Right. Okay, thank you. But Also, in the attitude, there have been lists of apps that are helpful rather than because what I have found is what works for one person. I just was with a client who said, what do you think of the bullet journal as a way of keeping track of things? Does that work for people with ADD? And the answer is, I have clients who love the bullet journal and it works great for them. I have other people who hate it.
Right, right.
So you have to experiment and you have to see what you enjoy. And I hate to say it, but the fact is that what works today may not work 6 months from now because we shift our level of interest.
Absolutely. Right. Okay. That makes sense. Then let me just end with one of the toughest things for the listeners at Attitude, and that's motivation and procrastination. Several people have posted questions about procrastination. One person describes, sitting down, knowing with a task that she's specified and is ready to do it at that moment, and just have a hard time getting started on it, and finding yourself doing online games or anything to avoid the task at hand.
Well, I've covered a lot of that here, but the first thing to say is it really a task or is it a project? And maybe if you broke it down even smaller, you could do a very small, minute part of it. Maybe it's a sense of I can't finish it. So maybe if you just allocate 10 minutes to working on it, you're more likely to do it, and then the wanting to continue effect takes place.
Right. I think it's the getting started. I think you put your finger on it, so that seems like it makes sense. The concept of just give it 10 minutes and then that gets you started. So that's a great idea. Susan, thank you so much. We're out of time. Lots and lots and lots to think about here for everybody. Folks, thank you for listening in. We will be posting Susan's slides along with her template for my daily focus, which I agree with everyone is a great model. And we wish you all the best of luck managing your tasks in the year ahead. And we'll be doing more at Attitude on this topic because it's an important one for all of us. Thanks everybody, and Happy New Year.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.